Coming up on the program, Myanmar's military denies there was a coup on February the 1st, but promised there will be an election and handover of power. U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Congress will establish an outside independent commission to investigate the January 6th attack on Congress. Plus, Nigeria's Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 states the nation's readiness to prevent an Ebola outbreak. Thanks for joining us on the program, everyone. I'm Teniola Shuboale here in Lagos. We'll begin with news about concerns for the life of one of Dubai's princesses said to be in a hostage situation. Princess Latifa Al Maktoum fled the country in 2018 and then sent secret video messages to friends, accusing her father of holding her hostage as she feared for her life. In the videos, she claims commandos drugged her as she fled by boat and flew her back to detention. Her friends who have been receiving these messages are raising alarm after they stopped receiving them, fearing her life may be in danger. They are now calling on the United Nations to step in. Former UN Rights Envoy Mary Robson, who had described Latifa as a troubled young woman after meeting her in 2018, says she was horribly tricked by the princess's family. But former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and President of Ireland has joined calls for international action to establish Latifa's whereabouts and current condition. Her father, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, is said to be one of the richest heads of states in the world. He's also ruler of Dubai and vice president of the United Arab Emirates. So the stories now. Police in Myanmar have slammed a second charge against civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, accusing her of violating the country's national disaster law. This was revealed by her lawyer. Suu Kyi has already been charged with importing walkie-talkies. The lawyer said Suu Kyi had met with a judge on a video call due to COVID-19 regulations, but lawyers could not attend because they had not been granted power of attorney.
Aung San Suu Kyi was charged not only with one case, as we have already known, two cases. The first one is, as already mentioned, she was charged with Import-Export Act. And the second one is Disaster Management Act. Two cases against her. I am conducting this case as the ethical duty of a human rights lawyer. So please support us spiritually, and please support us in any advice, any legal advice from anyone, internationally or nationally, locally. Any legal advice is welcomed by the group. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the military junta has guaranteed election will be held and there will be a handover of power. It has not yet given a date, but during a press conference today, it denied its ouster of an elected government was a coup or that its leaders were detained, instead accusing protesters of violence and intimidation. The military's justification of its February 1st seizure of power and arrest of government leader Aung San Suu Kyi and others came as protesters again took to the streets and after a UN envoy warned that the army of severe consequences for any harsh response to the demonstrations. Well, it appears Democrats are not done with former U.S. President Donald Trump wanting him to take responsibility for the January 6th attack on the Capitol that put all of their lives in danger. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now pursuing an outside independent commission to investigate the attack on January the 6th. In a letter to lawmakers, she said the commission would be modeled on the inquiry into the September 11 attacks on New York and the Pentagon. Also, that retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Russell Honore had over the past weeks been assessing the security needs of the Capitol in light of the attack. She says the commission will investigate and report on the facts and causes of the attack, the interference with the peaceful transfer of power, and the preparedness and response of both the Capitol Police and other branches of law enforcement.
I remain remain profoundly concerned about House Republicans' leadership acceptance of extreme conspiracy theorists. Particularly disturbing is their eagerness to reward a QAnon adherent, a 9/11 truther, a harasser of child survivors of school shootings, and to give them valued committee positions, including.
The VOA's Patsy Widakuswara joins us now from Washington. Patsy, is this a political vendetta against the former president? Does Ms. Pelosi have the authority to call this investigation?
Well, Tamara, the way it would turn out is that the Democrats, the House Democrats, is right now aiming to introduce this legislation, which you have outlined, the legislation that would create this commission to investigate what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and what can be done in the future to prevent such things from happening again. And as part of the legislation is also some additional funding for not just the Capitol grounds, but also for lawmakers who felt very traumatized and very scared, very afraid of their lives, not just during the January 6th Capitol siege attack, but also now, because, as you know, they're still receiving death threats, particularly from some Trump supporters who feel that they betrayed the former president by voting the way that they voted during the impeachment trial. So all of those things will be looked at by this legislation. So we don't know yet whether it will be passed. I mean, it's likely going to be passed in the House because Democrats control the House. We don't know yet the scope and the scale of the commission. And if it does become some sort of a 9/11 style commission, then it will be quite large. I mean, the 9/11 Commission took like 15 months to gather all the evidence. And back to your question about whether or not this is a political vendetta, well, the proponents of this commission say that this is what the country needs to move forward. We need a unified narrative in terms of just exactly what happened, what was President Trump's role, former President Trump's role in it, and how we can move forward in order to avoid the kind of polarization and vitriol that is now happening around the country in terms of what happened over January 6th.
With former President Donald Trump already acquitted over the weekend, what would be the relevance of this at this time?
Well, I think part of the relevance would be what would be the role of former President Trump. Sorry, I'm still getting used to the terminology of former President Trump. What will be his role in the future in American politics, right? How would he be involved in Republican Party politics, and whether or not he will run again in 2024? Because as you know, now that he's acquitted, there is no law that bars him from running for office again for the second time, for the second term. So part of this commission, part of the goal of Democrats is to try to get more daylight into the role of former President Trump to see if Americans would still support him playing an outsized role in American politics. Just now, a recent poll by Quinnipiac University said that 87% of Republicans say that they want to see President Trump run again for office. 75% say that they want to see him have a big role in politics. So in that way, the Democrats' point of view is that this is relevant because the American people need to know what they're getting into if they still demand President Trump to be part of future American politics.
All right, then, Patsy, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed.
My pleasure.
To some other stories now. Temperate regions of the world are experiencing really low temperatures, causing snowy white atmosphere. For example, a winter storm in the United States has brought freezing winds, ice, and snow to many regions that rarely see such frigid conditions.
Large portions of the United States from the Pacific Northwest through the Great Plains and into the mid-Atlantic states have been in the grip of bone-chilling weather over the weekend, featuring snow, sleet, and freezing rain. Even in Midwestern United States, residents tried navigating through heavy winds, ice, and bone-chilling temperatures. The National Weather Service says an Arctic air mass had spread across larger swathes of central and eastern sections of the country through Monday, with a storm front in the west likely to dump 1 to 2 feet of snow in the Cascades and northern Rockies through the day. Terrible winter weather has not only been experienced in the United States but also in Europe. In Greece, The Parthenon and other temples of the Acropolis were draped in snow today as a heavy snowstorm swept through the Greek capital, Athens. Authorities advised the public to restrict their movements in parts of the Greater Athens region as the country witnesses most intense snowfall in more than a decade. In Turkey, heavy snowfall caused disruption in Istanbul today, with falls of up to 50 centimeters in parts of the city. Pedestrians struggled on icy roads, which also caused problems for motorists. A busy highway from Istanbul to the western city of Balıkesir has been blocked for over 15 hours, leaving hundreds of vehicles stranded. Many Russians had to pave their way through the snow-covered streets of Moscow after heavy snowfall at the end of last week. Heavy snowfall have buried Moscow in massive snow piles, but drivers complain about the lack of street services in residential areas. Around 60,000 people were working to clear the streets. We'll end in Finland, where residents have been trying to make the most of the horrible weather. Finns, keen to avoid gyms and other indoor sports venues this winter because of the coronavirus, have found a new way to keep fit, running in the snow, wearing thick woolen socks instead of training shoes. Finland has seen particularly heavy snow this winter, and running outside in just socks provides great exercise as well as a sense of freedom.
Woolen socks are really warm, they give you freedom, so basically all you need in the winter, you don't need anything special. It's really hard, but all ultra long distances or long times when you do whatever running or skiing, it's on the crazy top basically. And of course this kind of special like barefoot running, what I do in the summertime, and wall sock running in the winter, you don't have to do much, it's crazy already, kind of.
Fortunately, there's no shortage of woolen socks, as many Finns have taken to knitting during the long winter lockdowns.
To our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic now, UK scientists say they have identified another coronavirus variant in the country with some potentially troubling mutations. Professor Ravi Gupta from the University of Cambridge is one of the scientists. He says the B1525 appears similar to the South African variant, which prompted the door-to-door test in areas where it has been found. It appeared to have significant mutations already seen in some of the other new variants. Experts are now studying the new variants to understand its risk. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update.
The discovery by the scientists comes as the UK launches the world's first trial to evaluate the immune responses after people get mixed shots during the usually 2-dose vaccine regimen, an attempt to increase the flexibility in vaccine supply and delivery. More than 800 volunteers aged 50 and above will be recruited for the trial. They will be given 4 different combinations of the first dose and the booster one. A first dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, followed by boosting with either the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine or a further dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and vice versa. Speaking of trials, Director of Center for Public Health Research at the Medical School of Nanjing University, Wu Ziwei, says it will take much more efforts in trials to address the safety and efficacy concerns over mixed vaccine uses in COVID-19 vaccination. Japan has only just received its first batch of COVID-19 vaccines ahead of the country's inoculation drive, which is scheduled to begin from tomorrow, Wednesday. The government officially approved the Pfizer vaccine on Sunday, the first of such approval in the country, grappling a third wave of infections. Australia's medical regulator says it has granted provisional approval for the COVID-19 vaccine developed by AstraZeneca, making it the second vaccine to get regulatory approval in Australia. The regulator last month approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for use and inoculations for its 25 million people, which will begin from February 22nd. Finally, New Zealand has recorded no new COVID-19 cases today on the second day of the 3-day lockdown in Auckland. The city's nearly 2 million residents plunged into a new 3-day lockdown on Sunday after 3 new COVID-19 cases were detected in the country. The more transmissible UK variant was confirmed to be involved on Monday, marking the first time the strain had been detected locally.
Still to come on the program. The European Space Agency calls for the world's next astronauts. This time, they want more women. More details in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on The World today. To another health matter, the outbreak of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo is raising concerns across the continent. Here in Nigeria, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says it's enhancing surveillance at points of entry into the country following the recent outbreak of Ebola in neighboring countries. PTF Chairman Mr. Boss Mustafa says authorities will be keeping a keen eye to avoid having to combat 2 deadly diseases at the same time.
The task force is also enhancing surveillance at points of entry to respond to recent outbreak of Ebola in neighboring countries, especially Guinea and Congo DCR. We shall keep an eye on it to avoid having to combat with 2 deadly diseases at the same time.
Our Ebola disease working group is already carrying out a risk assessment, and we will soon issue a public health advisory in this regard.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has alerted 6 countries to watch out for potential cases of Ebola after fresh outbreaks in Guinea and the DRC.
We have already alerted the 6 countries around, including, of course, Sierra Leone and Liberia, and they are moving very fast to prepare and be ready and to look for any potential cases. How come we've got another outbreak since they declared the end 2020? We have found, again, once you have had an Ebola outbreak, it is likely that it will recur. We've seen several outbreaks in Mandaka, in Equateur. Now, we don't know if this is down to Ebola persisting in the human population or if it's simply moving again from the animal population, but the genetic sequencing that's ongoing will help us with that information. With the expertise and experience so we now know there are 7 cases, 3 confirmed, 4 probable in Guinea, and 3 of those have died. We have identified 115 contacts, and the majority of those have been traced. That's 109. The contacts are in Zaragoza, but also in Conakry.
As the accolades pour in for the new Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the African Union has expressed its warmest congratulations. Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, tweeted his message, calling it a double historical precedent as she's the first woman and first African to head the organization in its 25-year history.
I'm very proud to be the first African. I'm proud to be the first woman.
Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala already has her plans set out in motion, even as she has received the mantle of leadership of the World Trade Organization. Top on her list of priorities as DG is to contribute so much more in helping solve the COVID-19 pandemic.
I believe the WTO can contribute so much more to helping solve the pandemic. This is what the world is facing right now. And so a very top priority for me would be to make sure that prior to the very important ministerial conference, whose date is yet to be decided, but maybe at the end of the year, that we come to some solutions as to how the WTO can help make vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics accessible in an equitable and affordable fashion to all countries, particularly to poor countries. The trade facilitation agreement.
Speaking on how the global trade body can support the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which commenced on January the 1st, 2021, she says there is a need to boost investment on the continent.
I want to say immediately that the WTO rules and the WTO institution has been an inspiration for the design of part of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So the WTO has already lent its body of institutional knowledge and wisdom to help design this. But building on that, we need to see what are the capacity constraints in implementing this. Can we use aid for trade to support the secretariat of the AFCFTA?
There are many more issues facing Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, but she believes they are not insurmountable.
The challenges facing the WTO are numerous and tricky, but they are not insurmountable.
Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is not new to being the first. She was the first female finance and foreign minister of Nigeria. When she joins the WTO's Geneva Lakeside headquarters, her portrait is set to be hung beside others of men, mostly white and from rich countries.
And I want to make sure that people remember my continent producing the first leader of the WTO that made a difference. Similarly, for women around the world, particularly young women, I'll have to do my best to make sure that their trust and their representation that they see in me is validated.
Amazing. Well, want to go out to space? There might just be a chance for you, as aspiring astronauts could soon try their luck to make their space dreams come true, as the European Space Agency has announced its latest recruitment drive. For the first time in 11 years, the ESA is calling for candidatures for the next generation of astronauts. Those interested have a 2-month window from late March to late May to apply. ESA head of talent acquisition Lucy van der Tas said qualified applicants should have a master's degree in the sciences or mathematics field. Candidates should come from one of the 22 member countries of the agency and preferably aged between 27 and 37 years old. They must also be fluent in English and a second language, be in good physical form and have the ability to stay calm under pressure. Oh, and if you're a woman, that's a huge plus.
We have astronauts from the last selection, and they are still active astronauts, and I would like to see them again going into orbit, going into space. But at the same time, we need also new astronauts to secure a continuity.
It's a very long and it's going to be a very rigorous process indeed. It will take around 18 months, allowing for potential implications from the COVID situation, of course. So candidates do need to be mentally prepared for this process and waiting times. After each selection stage, those candidates who fulfill the requirements and criteria and will perform the best in the tests will continue.
Well, go on then, try your luck. And that's the world today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shuboale.